Imagine it's November 1923. You're a retired schoolteacher in Berlin. You worked for 41 years. You saved diligently. You did everything right. You have 100,000 marks in a savings account. At the start of 1921, that was enough to buy a modest apartment, a reasonable retirement, a dignified end to a life of service. Now you're standing in line at a bakery. The sign in the window says, bread costs 200 billion marks per loaf. The price was 160 billion this morning. By tomorrow, it will be higher. Your life savings cannot buy a single meal. You look around and notice something strange. Across the street, a factory owner is loading furniture into a truck. Not fleeing, expanding. He just bought 2 more buildings this month, paid in cash. A banker you recognize from church walks past in a new coat. His wife wears jewelry you've never seen before. The industrialist Hugo Stinnes, you read in the paper, now owns over 1,500 companies. He controls shipping lines, paper mills, hotels, newspapers. He started the inflation with moderate holdings. He will end it as one of the richest men in Germany. You did everything right. He did something different. This is the story they don't teach in economics class. This is the pattern that repeats across every hyperinflationary collapse in modern history, from Weimar to Zimbabwe, from Argentina to Venezuela. The question isn't whether some people survive hyperinflation. The question is how, and why the same strategies that save the wealthy can be understood by anyone willing to study the mechanism instead of the panic. This isn't investment advice. This is forensic history. Once you see how the system actually works during monetary collapse, you'll understand why the outcomes are never random, why the wealth transfer always flows in the same direction, and why the people who pay the highest price are always the ones who trusted the system the most. Most people believe hyperinflation is chaos, random, unpredictable, a storm that hits everyone equally. The images we associate with monetary collapse are universal suffering, wheelbarrows of cash, empty shelves, bread lines. This framing is comforting in a perverse way. If hyperinflation is a natural disaster, then no one is to blame. If it destroys everyone equally, then at least it's fair. But that's not how it works. Hyperinflation is not a natural disaster. It's a wealth transfer mechanism with winners and losers, predetermined by their position in the financial structure before the collapse begins. The schoolteacher in Berlin didn't lose her savings to chaos. She lost them to a system that converted her lifetime of labor into someone else's capital. The factory owner didn't get lucky. He understood something she didn't. Currency is not wealth. This sounds simple. It's not. Most people spend their entire lives accumulating currency. They measure their success in dollars, euros, yen. They save in currency. They plan their retirement in currency. They think about their children's future in currency. They confuse the measuring stick with the thing being measured. The wealthy do not make this mistake. In stable times, this distinction doesn't matter much. The measuring stick holds relatively steady. $1 today buys approximately what $1 bought last year. In unstable times, the distinction is everything. When hyperinflation arrives, it doesn't destroy wealth. It reveals who had wealth and who had only currency. Let that settle. To understand how the rich survive hyperinflation, you must first understand what hyperinflation actually is. It is not simply prices going up. It is the death of a currency as a store of value. The technical definition economists use is a monthly inflation rate exceeding 50%. That means prices doubling every few weeks. Within a year, a currency can lose 99.9% of its purchasing power. Within 2 years, you're counting in trillions. But the technical definition misses the mechanism. Hyperinflation occurs when a government prints money to cover expenses it cannot afford through taxation or borrowing. This typically happens in one of 3 scenarios. First, war. Governments need to fund massive military operations without raising taxes to politically unacceptable levels. Weimar Germany printed marks to pay reparations and sustain a defeated economy. The Confederacy printed money to fund its war against the Union. Second, revolutionary economic policies. Zimbabwe printed money to redistribute land and fund government programs after destroying its agricultural base. Venezuela printed money to sustain socialist programs after oil prices collapsed. Third, debt spirals. When a government owes more than it can ever repay, and no one will lend it more money, and raising taxes would cause economic collapse, printing becomes the only option. Argentina has entered this trap multiple times. In all 3 cases, the pattern is the same. The government needs money. It cannot raise it legitimately, so it creates it. At first, this works. New money enters the economy. Things seem fine, then it doesn't work. More money is created. Prices start rising. Then it accelerates. The government must print faster just to keep pace with the devaluation its printing has caused. Then comes the collapse. The key insight is this. During the entire process, from the first excess printing to the final currency death, real assets do not disappear. Factories still exist. Land still exists, commodities still exist, businesses still operate. What changes is who owns them. The printing process transfers ownership from those holding currency to those holding assets, from those who produce to those who own, from the politically unconnected to the politically connected. This is not an accident. It's the mechanism. There are exactly 5 strategies that wealthy individuals and families use to preserve and expand wealth during hyperinflationary periods. They are not secrets. They are documented across every monetary collapse in modern history, but they require resources, knowledge, and timing that most people don't have. Understanding them won't make survival automatic, but not understanding them makes loss certain. Strategy 1. Own real assets. Before the collapse, Hugo Stinnes didn't become wealthy during Weimar hyperinflation. He was wealthy before it began, but his wealth was structured differently than the school teachers. Stinnes owned coal mines, steel plants, shipping lines. He owned things that produced goods people needed, regardless of what currency they used to buy them. When the mark collapsed, his coal was still coal, his steel was still steel, his ships still carried cargo. The value didn't change. Only the number of marks required to represent that value changed. This is the fundamental principle. Real assets, property, productive businesses, commodities, land, maintain their intrinsic value through currency collapse. Their price in the dying currency explodes upward. But that explosion is not profit, it's preservation. A factory worth 1 million marks in 1921 might be worth 1 trillion marks in 1923. The owner didn't gain anything. They simply avoided losing everything. Meanwhile, anyone holding marks in a bank account watched their purchasing power approach zero. The first strategy, then, is positioning. Own productive assets before the collapse begins. The challenge for ordinary people is obvious. Productive assets are expensive. Real estate requires capital. Starting a business requires capital. Buying commodities in meaningful quantities requires capital. The wealthy have this capital already. This structural advantage is not conspiracy, it's math. Strategy 2. Use debt as a weapon. This is the strategy most people never understand. During stable monetary periods, debt is a burden. You borrow money, you must repay it with interest. The borrower is the servant of the lender. During hyperinflation, this relationship inverts. When Hugo Stinnes borrowed marks from German banks to buy factories, he was making a bet. He was betting that the marks he borrowed would be worth less when he repaid them than when he received them. He was right. A loan of 10 million marks taken in 1921 to purchase a factory could be repaid in 1923 with the proceeds from selling a single day's production. The banks that lent the money lost everything. Stinnes kept the factory. This is why industrialists and real estate investors often emerge from hyperinflation wealthier than they started. They borrowed in currency, they bought in assets, they repaid in devalued paper. The asset remained, the debt disappeared. In Zimbabwe, farmers who had taken mortgages in Zimbabwean dollars to buy land found that their entire debt could be repaid with a week's egg sales by 2008. The eggs were still eggs. The debt was denominated in worthless paper. In Venezuela, homeowners who had mortgages in bolivars saw their debt evaporate while their property remained. The pattern is consistent. Debt denominated in the collapsing currency becomes a gift, but there's a catch. You must have the creditworthiness to borrow. You must have assets to pledge as collateral. You must time it correctly. Borrow before the collapse, not during it, when no one will lend. The wealthy have access to credit. The poor do not. Another structural advantage. Ardent strategy. 3. Hold foreign currency. The Weimar schoolteacher kept her savings in marks. The wealthy kept savings in dollars, Swiss francs, gold-backed currencies. Anything except the currency being printed into oblivion. This seems obvious in retrospect. It is not obvious in the moment. Governments experiencing hyperinflation typically do not announce it. They deny it. They blame speculators, hoarders, foreign enemies. They make it illegal to hold foreign currency. They impose capital controls. They freeze bank accounts. But the wealthy have options the ordinary citizen does not have. Bank accounts in Switzerland, business relationships in America, family members abroad, access to black markets where currency exchange continues despite official prohibition. During Weimar, the German government made it illegal to hold foreign currency. Penalties were severe. Enforcement was aggressive. The wealthy held foreign currency anyway. They had lawyers who structured holdings through foreign corporations. They had business partners abroad who held assets on their behalf. They had connections that made enforcement discretionary. In Zimbabwe, the official exchange rate for the Zimbabwean dollar was maintained by government decree long after the currency had collapsed in practice. Those who could access US dollars through parallel markets preserved their wealth. Those who couldn't watched their savings evaporate. In Venezuela, dollars became the true currency of the economy, even as the government mandated use of the bolivar. Those with access to dollar earnings, through exports, remittances, or black market exchanges, survived. Those without access didn't. This isn't about intelligence. It's about access. This is the strategy no one wants to discuss. Hyperinflation does not happen in a vacuum. It happens because governments make decisions. Someone decides to print. Someone decides where the printed money goes first. Someone decides which businesses receive contracts, which banks get bailouts, which industries receive protection. Those decisions are not random. In every hyperinflationary episode in modern history, political connections have been a primary survival mechanism for the wealthy. In Weimar Germany, industrialists who had relationships with government officials received advance warning of currency policies. They adjusted their positions accordingly. In Zimbabwe, those connected to Mugabe's government received land, government contracts, and access to foreign currency reserves, while ordinary citizens waited in line for bread that might not arrive. In Venezuela, those connected to the Chavez and Maduro regimes received import licenses, currency exchange access at favorable rates, and government contracts paid in hard currency while the economy collapsed around them. In Argentina, during each of its multiple currency crises, those with connections to the central bank and treasury knew which devaluation was coming and when. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's documented history. Information asymmetry is the greatest advantage of all. When you know the currency will be devalued next week, you buy assets today. When you know capital controls will be imposed tomorrow, you move your money tonight. Ordinary citizens don't have this information. They read about it in the newspaper after it's too late. Strategy 5. Portable, concealable wealth. When governments collapse, they become desperate. Desperate governments confiscate. They freeze bank accounts. They seize property. They impose wealth taxes. They nationalize industries. The wealthy have always understood this. That is why portable, concealable wealth has been part of wealthy families' portfolios for centuries. Gold, jewelry, diamonds, art that can be rolled and hidden. In Weimar Germany, wealthy families sewed gold coins into the linings of coats. They buried jewelry in gardens. They hid diamonds in false-bottomed suitcases. When the currency collapsed and the government grew desperate, these assets remained outside the system. They could not be frozen. They could not be tracked. They could not be seized unless physically discovered. The same pattern repeated in Zimbabwe, in Venezuela, in every collapse. Those who kept their entire wealth in bank accounts in the formal financial system, in assets registered with the government, found that wealth could be taken from them by decree. Those who kept a portion outside the system retained options. This isn't about tax evasion, it's about survival. Let's examine the documented record. The German mark's value was stable at approximately 4.2 marks per US dollar before World War I. By November 1923, the exchange rate was 4.2 trillion marks per dollar. The entire monetary system collapsed, but wealth did not disappear. Industrial production actually increased during parts of this period. Factories operated, goods were produced, exports continued. What changed was ownership. Hugo Stinnes began the hyperinflation as one of many wealthy industrialists. He ended it as perhaps the wealthiest man in Germany, controlling an empire of over 1,500 companies and 600,000 employees. His strategy: borrow marks to buy productive assets, then repay the loans in worthless paper. The middle class that had saved in marks, that had bought war bonds denominated in marks, that had trusted the currency to hold value, they lost everything. Economists later estimated that the German middle class lost 90% of its wealth during this period. The working class, paid in wages that lagged behind prices, saw living standards collapse. The wealthy retained their positions. This wasn't random. This was mechanical. Zimbabwe's inflation rate peaked at an estimated 89.7 sextillion% per year. The government stopped publishing official statistics when the numbers became meaningless, but even amid this incomprehensible destruction, patterns emerged. Those connected to the Mugabe government, farmers who received redistributed land, businessmen who received government contracts, officials who had access to foreign currency reserves, survived and even prospered. Those who had saved in Zimbabwean dollars lost everything. Economists later estimated that the German middle class lost 90% of its wealth during this period. The working class, paid in wages that lagged behind prices, saw living standards collapse. The wealthy retained their positions. This wasn't random. This was mechanical. Zimbabwe's inflation rate peaked at an estimated 89.7 sextillion% per year. The government stopped publishing official statistics when the numbers became meaningless. But even amid this incomprehensible destruction, patterns emerged. Those connected to the Mugabe government, farmers who received redistributed land, businessmen who received government contracts, officials who had access to foreign currency reserves, survived and even prospered. Those who had saved in Zimbabwean dollars lost everything. A documented example: civil servants who had contributed to pension funds for decades discovered their entire life savings couldn't buy a bus ticket. Meanwhile, those who had converted savings to US dollars or gold or South African rand or cattle preserved their wealth. Cattle became a store of value in Zimbabwe. Not because cattle are inherently money, but because cattle are real assets that cannot be printed. The farmers who had cattle survived. The pensioners who had paper did not. Venezuela's inflation exceeded 1,000% in 2018. The pattern repeated again. Those connected to the government, the Boliburguesia as they became known, accumulated enormous wealth even as the economy collapsed. They had access to the official currency exchange rate, which was a fraction of the black market rate. They could import goods at official rates and sell them at market rates. The arbitrage made fortunes. Ordinary citizens queued for hours to buy basic goods at controlled prices, when those goods were available at all. Those who received remittances from family abroad in US dollars could survive. Those without access to foreign currency couldn't. By 2019, the US dollar had become the de facto currency for anyone who could access it. The bolivar remained technically legal but practically worthless. Those who had converted bolivars to dollars before the collapse preserved their wealth. Those who trusted the system lost everything. This is the most extreme hyperinflation in recorded history. Prices doubled every 15 hours at the peak. The government issued a 100 quintillion pengo note, the largest denomination banknote ever printed, and still the pattern held. Those who held real assets, land, factories, foreign currency, survived. Those who held pengo did not. The mechanism is always the same. Every hyperinflation produces winners and losers. Let's be clear about who pays. Anyone who saved in the collapsing currency loses their savings. This is not partial, it is total. A lifetime of work, converted into currency and held in accounts, becomes worthless. The Weimar schoolteacher lost everything. The Zimbabwe pensioner lost everything. The Venezuelan professional who saved for retirement lost everything. Savers are systematically destroyed by hyperinflation. Wages lag prices, always. This is not a failure of employers. It's a mathematical reality. Prices are adjusted instantaneously by sellers responding to currency devaluation. Wages are adjusted periodically through negotiation and contract. In a hyperinflationary environment, by the time your wages increased, prices have already moved higher. You're permanently behind. Workers in Weimar Germany found that by payday, their wages bought a fraction of what they bought when they were earned. Some employers began paying daily, then twice daily, then hourly. Workers would literally leave mid-shift to spend their wages before they devalued further. Even so, real wages collapsed. Anyone who lent money in the collapsing currency loses. Banks, bondholders, pension funds. Anyone who held paper promises denominated in the dying currency. This is the mirror image of the debtor benefit. The debtor wins. The creditor loses. Banks that lent marks in 1921 received worthless repayment in 1923. Bondholders who bought government debt were repaid in paper worth nothing. Pension funds that held currency-denominated assets found their portfolios evaporating. This matters because most middle-class wealth is structured as creditor positions. Your bank account is a loan to the bank. Your pension is a promise to pay in currency. Your bonds are government IOUs. All of it evaporates. Those who have already converted their labor into savings are destroyed. Those who are still working can at least attempt to keep pace. A young worker in Weimar Germany could demand daily wages, could shift jobs for better pay, could adapt. A retired schoolteacher had no such options. Her savings were already fixed. Her income from those savings was already determined. She could only watch as it disappeared. Every hyperinflation is a catastrophe for the elderly. The poor have little to lose. The wealthy have the tools to protect themselves. The middle class has enough to lose and not enough to protect. A factory worker living paycheck to paycheck in Weimar Germany experienced hardship but had no savings to lose. A factory owner with assets and connections preserved his position. A middle-class professional with savings in the bank, a doctor, a lawyer, a civil servant, lost everything. The middle class was effectively eliminated as an economic category in Weimar Germany. It recovered, slowly, over decades, but the wealth was gone. Why can't governments simply stop? If printing money causes hyperinflation, and hyperinflation destroys the economy, why doesn't the government just stop printing? This is where the trap becomes clear. A government experiencing hyperinflation is typically running massive deficits. It cannot fund its operations through taxation. The economy is collapsing, tax revenue is falling, and political resistance to tax increases is extreme. It cannot borrow. No one will lend to a government whose currency is dying. It can only print. If it stops printing, it cannot pay soldiers, police, civil servants. It cannot fund basic services. The state begins to collapse. If it continues printing, the currency continues dying. There is no good option. This is why hyperinflation rarely ends through gradual reform. It ends through currency death and replacement. Weimar Germany introduced the Rentenmark, a new currency backed nominally by land. Zimbabwe abandoned its currency entirely and adopted the US dollar. Hungary introduced the forint, backed by gold reserves and foreign currency. Venezuela has partially dollarized, with the bolivar remaining legally valid but economically irrelevant. Stopping hyperinflation requires austerity that no democratic government can survive. Spending must be cut dramatically. Wages must be frozen or cut. Subsidies must be eliminated. State employment must be reduced, all while the population is already suffering. No politician can implement this and remain in power through normal means. This is why hyperinflation often ends with regime change, either through revolution, coup, or electoral collapse. The government that caused the hyperinflation cannot be the government that ends it. The political constraint is as real as the fiscal constraint. If a government has significant foreign currency debt, the situation is even worse. Domestic currency debt can be inflated away. This is what happens to those domestic creditors we discussed. Foreign currency debt cannot be. If Zimbabwe owes dollars, printing more Zimbabwean dollars doesn't help. The dollar debt grows larger relative to the domestic economy as the domestic currency collapses. This is why heavily indebted countries facing hyperinflation often default on foreign debt simultaneously. They have no other option. The math doesn't work any other way. This analysis has so far emphasized the structural advantages of the wealthy. Those advantages are real, but the mechanisms can be understood by anyone, and some of the strategies, adapted appropriately, can be implemented by people without great wealth. This is not investment advice. This is pattern recognition from historical record. The first step is classification. Look at your assets, which are real assets, real estate you own outright or with a fixed-rate mortgage. Ownership in productive businesses, commodities you physically possess, which are currency-denominated claims, bank accounts, CDs, bonds, pension promises, insurance policies with cash value. These are not assets. These are IOUs from institutions, denominated in currency. If the currency dies, these die with it. Most people, if they honestly classify their assets, discover they own very little except currency-denominated claims. This is the vulnerability. If you have fixed-rate debt in your domestic currency, a mortgage, for example, and you're in an economy experiencing significant inflation, you're accidentally on the right side of the trade. Your debt becomes easier to repay as the currency devalues. Your property remains. This is exactly what Hugo Stinnes did, just at a larger scale. The caution, variable rate debt does not have this property. The interest rate rises with inflation. You get no benefit. And if your income collapses faster than the currency devalues, even fixed-rate debt can destroy you. The mechanism works, but the conditions matter. You do not need Swiss bank accounts to hold foreign currency. Many countries allow residents to hold foreign currency accounts domestically. Even without accounts, foreign currency can often be obtained and held physically. The principle: do not hold 100% of your monetary assets in a single currency, especially if that currency is issued by a government with significant fiscal problems. This is not a prediction that any particular currency will collapse. It's recognition that concentration risk exists. Gold remains the historical store of value during monetary collapse. It has no counterparty risk. It cannot be printed. It is recognized as valuable across cultures and throughout history. This doesn't mean gold is always a good investment. In stable times, gold generates no income and often underperforms productive assets. But in monetary collapse, gold has consistently held value when currencies have not. This is documented across every hyperinflation in modern history. A portion of savings in physical gold, held outside the banking system, provides optionality that paper assets do not. In hyperinflation, income matters more than savings. Savings are destroyed. Income continues, even if eroded. The worker who can demand payment in kind, food, goods, foreign currency, survives better than the retiree whose pension was fixed years ago. This suggests that skills that remain valuable regardless of economic conditions, medical skills, repair skills, food production, provide a form of security that financial assets cannot. This is not romantic nostalgia, it's observation. In every hyperinflation, those who could produce things people needed maintained economic function. Those who could only spend savings did not. The wealthy survive partly through early action. They see the signs before the general public. They move before capital controls are imposed. They convert currency before the collapse accelerates. This advantage can be partly replicated through education. Understanding fiscal metrics, debt to GDP ratios, money supply growth, central bank independence, political dynamics, provides lead time. No one rings a bell announcing hyperinflation, but the conditions that produce it develop over months and years, not overnight. Those who watch can act. Those who don't watch can only react. Let's pull back and observe the full pattern. Hyperinflation does not fall from the sky. It emerges from identifiable conditions. Government spending consistently exceeds revenue. Debt accumulates faster than the economy grows. Political pressure makes spending cuts impossible. Eventually, the market loses confidence in the government's ability to repay. Borrowing becomes impossible or prohibitively expensive. Printing begins. Once printing begins to fund deficits, the race is on. Currency devalues. Government needs more currency. More is printed. Currency devalues further. The acceleration is mathematical. It cannot stop itself. Only external intervention, currency board, dollarization, regime change, international bailout, can break the cycle. The question for any observer is not whether this could happen. It has happened, repeatedly, across different cultures, different governments, different eras. The question is whether the conditions exist, and if they do, what position you want to be in when the mechanism activates. This is not a prediction. This is not a warning about any specific country or currency. This is pattern recognition. Since the 2008 financial crisis, central banks globally have expanded their balance sheets by unprecedented amounts. Government debt levels in major economies have reached peacetime records. Interest on that debt consumes growing shares of government budgets. None of this guarantees hyperinflation. Most developed economies have institutional buffers that Zimbabwe and Venezuela did not. Central bank independence, deep capital markets, reserve currency status, historical credibility. But the conditions that produce hyperinflation, fiscal imbalance, monetary expansion, political inability to cut spending, exist on a spectrum. And movement along that spectrum changes the probability distribution. The responsible observer does not predict. The responsible observer positions. Diversification is not panic. Understanding is not pessimism. Those who understand the mechanism do not need to predict the timing. They have already adjusted their position. Those who don't understand the mechanism will have no time to adjust when it matters. This is historical and educational analysis, not financial or investment advice. Every situation is unique. Past patterns suggest, but do not guarantee future outcomes. Return to Berlin, November 1923. The schoolteacher stands in line, her life savings gone. Across the street, Hugo Stinnes expands his empire. Both lived through the same historical event. One was destroyed, one was enriched. The difference was not luck. The difference was not intelligence. The difference was structural position. Stinnes understood that currency was not wealth. The schoolteacher did not. Stinnes used debt as a tool. The schoolteacher feared debt. Stinnes held assets that could not be printed. The schoolteacher held only promises. Stinnes had information and connections. The schoolteacher had trust in institutions. The same pattern repeated in Hungary, in Zimbabwe, in Venezuela, in Argentina, repeatedly. The same pattern will repeat again somewhere, someday. The math is certain. The question isn't whether you'll be in the position of the schoolteacher or the industrialist. The question is whether you've understood the difference. History doesn't repeat precisely, but the mechanism doesn't change. Those who hold currency are at the mercy of those who print it. Those who hold assets are not. Those who understand the system can position within it. Those who trust the system can only hope. Hope is not a strategy. Understanding is. This channel exists to study these mechanisms before they repeat, to examine the autopsies while there's still time to learn from them. Most people won't watch this until it's already too late. The few who study history before it's needed will have options, the many will not. The pattern is already in motion. The only question is where you stand when it arrives.